Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make this fun card, which I think could be a pretty Valentine's card, friendship card, or you could even use these techniques and color scheme for a Christmas card. It's very versatile. It's fun, fresh, and crisp, and we're getting a huge snowstorm, so I thought it just fit with the current weather that we're having. We're going to use some watercolor crayons and stamps to create some soft landscape elements, and I'm going to show you the stamps we're going to use. We're going to use a couple of my new stamps released with our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com, and I'll have a in-depth list in the video description of all the products that I'm using. So the focus of this card is this set here called Woods in Winter. This, of course, is the main focal point tree, and then I used this tree, and then this tree, which is the same design, just reversed and smaller from the tree set. So that's kind of fun. If you have been using the other stamp sets I've designed from Rubber Stamp Tapestry and you just wish you had some more landscape elements, these trees work in really nicely because then you can get those trees that are further away, and that's what I did here, and you're going to see in the video. I'm going to put, in addition to the list of all the supplies, coupon code in the video description, so you can check that out. And without further ado, let's just jump into the tutorial. There's a lot of fun things that I'm going to show you today, and I'm also going to give you a glimpse behind the scenes at my design process. So let's get to it. I'm starting out with a 4" by 6" piece of watercolor paper, and I'm taping it down to a piece of foam core, and I'm just making sure that I have an even 1/8 of an inch border on all 4 sides, and that's going to give me a really pretty frame when I remove the tape later. I'm using watercolor crayons because I just wanted to keep things simple today, and I'm scribbling out some of this nice dark blue onto a plate so I can use it as a palette. And I'm going ahead and wetting the watercolor paper so my paint will flow and blend. Now I'm just adding water to the paint that I scribbled out on the palette, and I'm going to give it a wash of blue in the sky. For more intense color, you can also grab pigment from the tip of your watercolor crayon with your water brush and then add that to the sky as well. I'm using a different shade of blue just to give it a little bit of interest. While the background is still wet, I'm going to do some stamping, and that's going to give those faraway trees a fuzzy look and make them look further in the distance. So I wet my stamp with clear water, and now I'm scribbling on my stamp with shades of teal, blue, and green, and I'm going to be using that watercolor crayon as the ink. The watercolor crayons that I'm using are by the company Lyra, and I really like them because they're very inexpensive, but they perform almost as well as my favorite, which is the Caran d'Ache watercolor crayons. But you can use whatever brand you have on hand. You could even use paint if that's what you have. Now, after stamping it a couple times, notice I only had to ink it up once with the crayons, and there was plenty of pigment. I just brushed along the bottom to give it a little softness, and now I'm adding a little bit more color and shadow with the watercolor crayon directly into the paper. Be careful when you do add watercolor crayon to the wet paper because it will be really intense because it's going to just grab that paper when it's wet. So just keep that in mind and have a very, very light touch when you do that. And I'm just going to put a few more of those smaller trees over to the left to continue the scene. And I'm doing my second generation stamping in the middle. But you can see how just a little bit of effort gives you this really beautiful painterly look. Now I'm grabbing a little bit of pigment directly from that teal stick and adding some shadows under all of those trees to unify them. Now I'm doing that same technique to the larger group of trees, the one from the winter trees set, but I'm using some brighter green, and that's going to make it come closer to the viewer because brighter colors just want to come forward where cooler colors want to recede. That's just going to help with my perspective. And again, I'm stamping it lower in the paper so it's going to be closer to the viewer, and I'll be able to get a couple stamps from each inking like I did before. Don't worry if you get any mushy lines because this is not the focal point. This is just what we're kind of doing in the background. Use your paintbrush to soften the bottoms of your trees and to make everything tie in. Now I'm scribbling a little bit of the purple that I used in the trees and also some of that cobalt blue color that I had added to the sky onto my plate so I have a little bit more of a makeshift palette. And I'm picking up that purple and adding it into the bottom of the painting to kind of give me some kind of like snow shadows and help pull the viewer into the scene. By making kind of diagonal shadow areas, it just draws the viewer in. It's a nice trick, and plus it gets rid of all that stark white at the bottom of the card. You want to make sure your card is completely dry before you go on to the next step, which is some embossing. And I have 3 different shades of embossing powder, so I can do a little embossing powder painting. And this is a really fun technique that I'm going to share with you. So I've got a brown for the trunk of my tree, and I've got 2 shades of green for the boughs of my tree. I'm using VersaFine, which is a clear, sticky ink. You can also use glycerin, like on a makeup sponge if you don't have embossing ink. And I am going to wipe my paper with my cornstarch pouch, which is just a homemade embossing pouch. You can buy one or make your own just by putting cornstarch in a baby sock and just, it's pretty simple, or sew a little fabric pouch. That just takes the static off of your paper and prevents the embossing powder sticking where you don't want it to stick. I hope that made sense. So now I'm just going to kind of stamp this tree off center, and my watercolor paper is taped to a piece of foam core board, which is a pretty soft, even surface, but I'm still going to give it a lot of pressure because this is watercolor paper, and I want to make sure that it hits all the nooks and crannies in that paper. And I was just kind of double checking it by looking at it in the light to see if I had got the ink down. So I'm just putting the brown paper powder where the trunk is. Now I'm going to take a little dry brush, make sure it's dry, and sweep off the excess powder that got on the branches. So I can dump this powder back into my container and save it for later, because that's all there is brown. Okay, and notice before we began, I uncapped all my embossing powder so it would be ready. Now, here and there, I am going to hit it with some bright green embossing powder. This is kind of like a Christmas green. And then I can also collect that embossing powder and put that back in the jar, as long as I didn't have anything else on that scrap of paper. So notice I'm collecting in between. And then finally, I'm going in with some really dark, almost like a hunter green embossing powder, and I'm covering the tree part really well because I want to make sure that that sticks to any of the spots that didn't have any other powder on it. It looks pretty good, and any little stray bits I will just brush off with a dry brush, and then I will collect that dark green powder into that container as well. Now I'm going to heat up this stage of the picture because I just wanted to make sure I locked down all of these colors before I proceeded with the next color. Because I wanted to use red, that's a pretty different color, and I didn't want to get those powders mixed up. So again, I'm simply stamping these little cardinals with clear ink on the branches. If I had to do it again, I would have used a red pigment ink because I think that would have made my red show up a lot better. I'm using some red embossing powder here, and then I'm going to heat this up. Sometimes when you heat emboss, the embossing powder goes really dark until it cools and then it lightens back up again, which was the case with these birds, but still they weren't as bright red as I wanted them to be, so I decided to stamp them again on white paper and heat emboss them, and then I would have them to glue on over my birds after I was done my texture paste portion of the card, which you'll see in a minute. I wanted to show you this process because I don't go from point A to point B in a straight line when I'm designing. There's a lot of stops along the way. I love the crisp white frame you get when you use the masking tape, and as a bonus it gives you another layer in your card and it doesn't add any extra weight. So I've got some elements here that I want to use in my card. I cut those foliage branches from a Tim Holtz die. I just have a panel of red cardstock, and I have this strip of polka dot ribbon. I thought it'd be pretty to kind of tie it around the red panel and just have it hanging off over the edge as an embellishment. I'm using really strong double-sided tape on the back of the card to hold the ribbon in place and also adhere it to my card base. The card is 5 inches by 7. This red panel is 4.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and of course the watercolor paper we began with was 4 by 6. Because of the knot on the front of the card, I needed to use some dimensional adhesive on the back of the watercolor panel, so I'm using foam tape, and I've just kind of put it all around on the back to keep it from getting crushed when it's mailed. I didn't press that panel down too tightly after I placed it on top of the red panel because I knew I wanted to tuck these little branches underneath, so I just very gently peeled back the corners and tucked in those little foliage branches. I think dies like this that are like basic branches, foliage, leaves, that sort of thing never go out of style. You can always use them season after season. So if you're on a limited budget or you just want to have a limited amount of supplies, I think going with kind of all occasion dies like this is your best bet. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff. I have this super chunky sparkly glitter. It's called Diamond Dust, and I'm going to be using that on top of this texture paste, which is, it says it's white metallic, but to be honest, I don't see any metallicness in it at all. It's just kind of like a white textury texture paste, which is great for snow. And I'm using a tiny little palette knife to apply it to the branches only. And the reason I wanted to put my card together first was so that I'd be able to just set it all aside and let it dry. I know I'd get very impatient if I had to wait for the texture paste to dry before I could put my card together. So that's what I did. If you were gonna assembly line this project, like make a bunch at once, because this is so cute, it would be great for Christmas cards, then you could do all your, texture paste and messy stuff while it's still taped down to your watercolor board. That would be totally fine, but I'm doing it this way because I'm only making one, and I just wanted to kind of see the card get put together. Now, I'm not going to be too careful around the birds because I did stamp them again and cut them out, so I'm going to be adding them on. Plus, it's going to make them a little dimensional, which I like. But just do less is more with this stuff. You can scrape it back to a point, but I would just try to put down a little bit, and then if you really like it, then add more. Like that big gob I had, I was kind of concerned that might be overdoing it, so I just made sure I went kind of gently with it until I was sure. Now, the way the stamp is designed, you've got those boughs that you can layer the snow on top of. If you don't have texture paste, you can make some very easily. You can get a tube of white latex paintable caulking from the home improvement store, and you can get it in a squeeze tube, like a tube of toothpaste, instead of that big caulking gun thing, and that's great. You can make your own. It's just as good as the stuff you buy, and it will save you quite a bit of money, and sometimes you can even find it at the dollar store, which is even better. And I wouldn't buy it in bulk because it's only got a shelf life of a couple of years, so I just buy one, and then when you use it up, get another one. But that's a great DIY version. While the texture paste is still wet, you want to sprinkle in some of your glitter. Now, you could use any type of clear glitter you want for this. I just wanted this really chunky stuff because I thought it would really sparkle and really look fantastic on this. But, it's going to be just as pretty with whatever clear glitter or white glitter you have. I'm just picking it up with my fingers and pinching it on there so that I don't get too much, but you could just dump it on there. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to use a clean palette knife. I just wiped off my palette knife, and I'm going to tap in the glitter just to make sure it's really stuck into the snow well. Now I'm going to use some tacky glue to adhere those little cardinals that I had cut out. Because remember, the colors just weren't very bright because of all the color I had behind the embossing powder. And I am just going to tap that right on top of the previous birds that I had stamped and embossed. And you can see how filthy my fingers are from all that watercolor crayon. Oh my, that's awful. Don't worry if the glue smushes out a little bit because it will dry completely clear. And this is just the old classic Aleene's Thick and Tacky glue. I love it. It works really well for this. And it's also going to help the birds be a little bit more dominant in the scene because it's going to give them a little dimension. At this point, I felt that my card needed a little bit more depth in the bottom of it. I just felt like it was too light where the snow was at the bottom of the card. So I just kind of taping off that border again to protect it. Now I will keep tape that's not too grimy. I'll just stick it on the edge of my table so I can reuse it again. And this is a perfect instance when you want to do that. I scribbled some of my watercolor crayons on the edge of that plate, and I'm just going to use that as a makeshift watercolor palette to add a little bit more color in the bottom of the scene here. And of course, if you don't have watercolor crayons, you can use watercolor pencils, you can use watercolors. It's completely up to you. You could scribble a marker on a tile and do it that way. Please don't feel like you have to go out and buy a zillion new supplies to make this card. I took a bit of a risk with this next technique, but I was so glad I did. I literally gasped after I did this. I was so pleased with the result. I have this snow stencil, and honestly, I never used it that much, despite how filthy it is. And I never really got the big deal about it, but after using it for this project, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be using this on all my winter cards now. It is, it's like a polka dot stencil, but it's very random, and it's definitely like falling snowflakes. And so here I'm just using that palette knife to scrape the snow carefully through the stencil. I did dry the tray with my heat tool and it didn't blister it or bubble it, so that's a good thing about that particular texture paste. That was the Brea Reese white matte metallic texture paste, which isn't metallic at all, so I don't know why they call it that, but it didn't bubble at all when I heated it up with a heat tool to start to dry it. But I would definitely use a bigger palette knife to do this in the future because this just took a lot longer than it needed to be, but wait till you see when I lift up the stencil. Oh my gosh, isn't that beautiful? I just absolutely love that look. I love how the dots are all random and it just really looks like how snowfall does. You know, when you're looking out the window and it's snowing, you see some big clumps, you see some little clumps. It's not all uniform and I just love that. I'm also using the palette knife to add some snow into the foreground just to kind of give that a little bit more dimension and give it a little bit more prominence so your eyes kind of are drawn to it. That gives you more perspective because you have more detail and more texture in the front, and then things start to fade off and get misty towards the back of the card. And now I'm adding some glitter into the foreground snow only because adding it into the snow in the sky would just be crazy and overdoing it. You know, I hate to overdo stuff, so I kept the glitter to the tree and the foreground snow only. Look how pretty that is. Oh my gosh, I just absolutely am loving texture paste right now. And so I was looking at the tree. I thought that foreground tree needed to be defined a little bit more. So what I did was I took a kind of a dark evergreen colored marker, just your regular water-based marker, and I started to just add some shadows. Now you can go right over the embossing there because it's not going to stick to that. It will just leave a shadow around the boughs, which is really awesome. I thought it needed a sentiment. It was just looking a little too sparse in the sky, so I stamped and doodled in a little sentiment that says, "Your friendship means the world to me." And this is how I do a perfectly notched end because I don't have many banner dies. You cut down the center, cut a strip flush, cut down the center, and then cut in from each corner, and you'll get a perfectly notched banner, just like you had a die. But you don't have to go buy a die, which I really love. I probably should get some banner dies sometime. I just have a couple from like random sets, but I think that looks really pretty. I do think it needs a little bit more punch, so I am inking the edges of this cardstock just with the same ink I stamped with. See how it's so much brighter when I use a red ink and red embossing rather than just clear ink and red embossing? So there's a little tip for you. And I'm using foam tape to stick that down. Now this would be a really pretty Galentine's card because it's a friendship card, or obviously you can change it up to Christmas, Valentine's Day, birthday, whatever you want. I think it's just a really pretty card and I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope you enjoyed this little kind of sneak peek as to how I design a card because, like I said, not everything goes from point A to point B in a straight line. You kind of learn stuff and change your mind along the way, so don't feel bad if you do that too. I want to thank you so much for watching today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and visit our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them at pegstamps.com and be sure to check out the coupon code in the video description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.